Welcome back to the Deep Dive Podcast. I'm Eric, and joining me as always is Anna.
Happy to be here.
Today we're talking about something that's been showing up in just about every manufacturing and digital transformation conversation lately: digital twins. And honestly, it's one of those terms that's everywhere right now.
It really is. You can't go to a conference, sit through a webinar, or have a conversation about manufacturing modernization without hearing someone bring it up.
The funny thing is, if you ask 10 people what a digital twin actually is, you'll probably get 10 different answers.
That's because a lot of people know it's important, but they're not always sure what it actually does. Some people think it's a dashboard, some think it's artificial intelligence, others think it's just a digital version of a piece of equipment.
Which isn't completely wrong.
Exactly. A digital twin is much more dynamic than that. At its core, a digital twin is a virtual representation of a physical process, system, manufacturing environment, or asset that continuously receives and analyzes real world operational data. The important distinction is that it isn't static. It's constantly evolving based on what's actually happening inside the physical environment. It's modeling.
So instead of simply telling you what happened yesterday, it can help organizations understand what's happening right now and potentially what might happen next.
That's where the real value starts to emerge. Because once you're able to combine real time operational data with modeling, simulation, analytics, and predictive capabilities, you move beyond monitoring and begin supporting much more informed decision making.
And that's one of the reasons we're seeing so much interest from pharmaceutical manufacturers. Manufacturing environments today are significantly more complex than they were even 10 years ago. Organizations are managing advanced therapies, increasingly automated production lines, sophisticated supply chains, highly regulated environments, and massive volumes of data.
Not to mention growing pressure from virtually every direction. Leadership teams are expected to improve efficiency. Quality teams are expected to strengthen oversight. Operations teams are expected to reduce downtime. Supply chain teams are expected to maintain continuity. And all of this has to happen while maintaining compliance with evolving global regulatory expectations.
It's a challenging balancing act because organizations aren't simply trying to produce more product. They're trying to improve performance, reduce risk, strengthen quality, maintain compliance, and modernize operations simultaneously.
And that's where traditional approaches sometimes begin to show their limitations. Historically, many manufacturing organizations have operated in a largely reactive manner. Something happens, an alarm triggers, a deviation occurs, equipment fails, a process drifts outside expected operating conditions. Then the organization investigates and determines what went wrong.
Which means you're essentially learning from the past.
Exactly. There's certainly value in investigations and root cause analysis, but they're inherently reactive. By the time the investigation begins, the event has already occurred. The disruption has already happened. The resources have already been consumed. And in some cases, production schedules have already been impacted.
Digital twins offer the opportunity to shift some of that thinking. Instead of waiting for problems to develop, organizations can begin identifying patterns earlier, evaluating potential risks sooner, and making decisions based on predictive insights rather than purely historical information.
And I think that's an important distinction. A lot of discussions around digital transformation focus heavily on technology. But the real objective isn't implementing technology for the sake of technology. The objective is improving decision making, it's improving visibility, it's improving operational performance. The technology is simply the tool that helps accomplish those goals.
That's a great point, because one of the biggest mistakes organizations can make is pursuing digital transformation simply because everyone else is doing it. Without a clear business objective, even the most sophisticated technology can struggle to deliver meaningful value.
We see that quite often. Organizations become excited about artificial intelligence, predictive analytics, digital twins, machine learning, cloud platforms, and other emerging technologies. But if they haven't clearly identified the operational problems they're trying to solve, implementation becomes much more difficult.
And that actually brings us to the project we're discussing today. Our team at Emma International recently worked with a pharmaceutical manufacturer that was pursuing a broader digital transformation initiative. Digital twin technology was one component of that modernization effort. But what stood out immediately was that this wasn't a company chasing technology trends.
Not at all. They had very specific objectives. They wanted to improve manufacturing efficiency, greater visibility into operational performance, stronger decision making capabilities, and they wanted to better understand how their manufacturing environment was functioning in real time.
What I found particularly interesting was that they already had substantial amounts of manufacturing data available. This wasn't an organization suffering from a lack of information.
Actually, quite the opposite. They had equipment data, sensor data, automation system data, environmental monitoring information, maintenance records, production data, and they had operational performance metrics.
Information was being collected from virtually every direction, which sounds like a good problem to have.
At first glance, yes, but having data and having visibility are not necessarily the same thing. And
That's a really important point, because many organizations assume that if they're collecting enough data, visibility will naturally follow.
unfortunately, it doesn't always work that way. In this case, many of the systems responsible for generating information operated independently. Individual systems performed their intended functions very well, but they weren't necessarily creating a connected view of manufacturing performance across the broader operation.
So different teams were often looking at different pieces of the puzzle.
Exactly. One system might provide valuable information about equipment performance. Another might manage environmental monitoring data, support batch execution activities, or maintain maintenance records. Each system was delivering useful information within its own area, but there wasn't always a simple way to connect all of those insights together.
Which creates challenges when you're trying to understand what's happening across the entire manufacturing environment.
Precisely. And that's where many organizations find themselves. Like they're collecting more data than ever before, yet they still struggle to proactively identify trends, inefficiencies, or emerging operational risks.
Because they're often spending more time gathering information than analyzing it.
That's exactly right. And when that happens, organizations naturally become more reactive. Teams spend significant amounts of time trying to piece together information from multiple systems, multiple reports, and multiple data sources before they can even begin evaluating what the information is actually telling them.
So even though the organization had invested heavily in data collection and operational systems, they still faced limitations when it came to visibility and predictability.
They did, and those limitations became increasingly important as the organization continued pursuing broader modernization objectives. Because leadership wasn't simply looking for more reports, they weren't looking for more dashboards. They wanted actionable insight, greater confidence in decision making, earlier identification of potential issues, and they wanted a more connected understanding of manufacturing performance across the operation.
Which ultimately became one of the primary drivers behind evaluating digital twin technology.
Bingo. The goal wasn't to create another layer of complexity. The goal was to create a more connected, more predictive, and more transparent manufacturing environment.
So where did the organization start seeing opportunities to improve?
One of the first areas was equipment monitoring and maintenance predictability.
And that's where the conversation starts getting really interesting. As we discussed, the organization wasn't lacking information. The real challenge was turning all of that information into actionable insight. One area where that challenge became particularly apparent was equipment monitoring and maintenance. And honestly, this is a challenge we see across the industry. And
It really is. Like most manufacturers understand how critical equipment reliability is to overall operational success. The challenge is that many maintenance programs still rely heavily on either scheduled maintenance activities or reactive maintenance after something has already gone wrong.
which sounds reasonable on paper. You service equipment according to a schedule, perform preventative maintenance, and keep everything running smoothly.
In theory, yes, but equipment doesn't always follow the schedule we create for it. A pump doesn't know it's supposed to fail in 6 months. A motor doesn't wait for a maintenance technician to become available, and process equipment doesn't always provide obvious warning signs before performance begins to decline.
That's a great point. When people think about equipment failure, they often imagine something dramatic. An alarm goes off, a machine shuts down, production stops. But that's not usually how it starts.
Exactly. More often, performance degradation is gradual. You might see subtle vibration changes, a slight decrease in efficiency, minor temperature fluctuations, small shifts in operational performance. Individually, those changes might seem insignificant, but collectively, they can be early indicators that something larger is developing.
And if nobody recognizes those patterns early enough, organizations eventually find themselves dealing with unplanned downtime.
Which can become incredibly expensive in pharmaceutical manufacturing. And it's not simply about repairing a piece of equipment. You're potentially impacting production schedules, you're disrupting manufacturing campaigns, you're affecting supply chain planning, you may trigger investigations, and depending on the circumstances, product availability could also become a concern.
That's why predictive maintenance has become such an important topic. Organizations don't want to be surprised anymore.
That's really the goal. People often think predictive maintenance means fixing equipment sooner, but that's only part of the story. The real objective is reducing uncertainty. It's about understanding equipment behavior well enough to identify developing risks before those risks become operational disruptions.
And that's where digital twins began creating immediate value for this organization. Instead of looking at isolated maintenance records or individual equipment metrics, they were able to evaluate performance trends in a much more connected way.
Exactly. The digital twin environment allowed teams to continuously monitor equipment behavior and identify patterns that may have otherwise gone unnoticed. Rather than waiting for a failure event, they could evaluate changes in performance over time and make decisions based on emerging trends.
Which creates a very different operating model. Instead of asking what happened, you're asking what appears to be developing.
That's a perfect way to describe it. And that shift from reactive thinking to predictive thinking is one of the biggest advantages digital twins can provide.
Another major focus area involved process modeling and simulation capabilities. And this is also where digital twins start becoming much more powerful than traditional monitoring systems.
Absolutely. Because now we're moving beyond visibility and entering the realm of scenario analysis. Organizations can begin evaluating potential outcomes before making changes inside actual manufacturing environments.
Which can significantly reduce operational risk. Let's say a manufacturer wants to modify a process parameter. Historically, that might require extensive testing, evaluation, and implementation planning.
And understandably so. No organization wants to introduce unnecessary risk into GMP operations. Changes must be carefully evaluated, quality impacts must be understood, validation requirements must be addressed. There are a lot of factors involved.
With digital twin technology, organizations can often evaluate multiple scenarios digitally before making decisions in production.
Exactly. They can assess how changes might impact throughput, evaluate equipment utilization, explore environmental impacts, and analyze process stability. They can model different operating conditions and better understand potential outcomes before implementing changes in the real world.
It's almost like having a manufacturing test environment.
That's actually a great analogy. And obviously, organizations still need to follow appropriate validation and change control procedures. But digital twins can provide valuable insight during decision making and planning activities.
And the benefit isn't limited to process changes. Organizations can also evaluate operational strategies, maintenance approaches, production planning scenarios, and broader optimization opportunities.
Precisely. The ability to experiment virtually before making physical changes can create significant value from both an operational and risk management perspective.
Another aspect of the project involved integrating real-time manufacturing and equipment data into centralized monitoring capabilities. And this is where digital twins become much more dynamic than traditional process models.
That's right. Traditional models are often static snapshots. Digital twins continuously evolve based on actual operating conditions. As new information becomes available, the model updates to reflect what's happening within the manufacturing environment.
Which gives organizations a much clearer understanding of operational performance.
And perhaps more importantly, it helps identify subtle changes that might otherwise go unnoticed. Because not every operational issue announces itself with a major alarm.
Sometimes the earliest indicators are small deviations from normal operating behavior. a slight decline in efficiency, a change in vibration patterns, increasing process variability.
Absolutely. Individually, those signals may not appear significant, but when viewed collectively through a connected operational model, they can provide valuable insight into emerging risks.
And the earlier organizations identify those risks, the more options they have available to address them.
That's one of the biggest benefits. Time. The earlier you recognize a developing issue, the more flexibility you have to respond proactively rather than reactively.
Now, up to this point, everything we've discussed sounds incredibly promising. Improved visibility, predictive maintenance, process simulation, operational optimization. But pharmaceutical manufacturing introduces another layer of complexity.
A very significant layer of complexity because, unlike many industries, pharmaceutical manufacturers operate inside highly regulated environments.
And that changes the conversation considerably. You can't simply install new technology and assume the work is complete.
Not even close. The moment advanced technologies become part of GMP operations, organizations must begin addressing validation requirements, data integrity expectations, traceability obligations, change control processes, cybersecurity considerations, and quality oversight requirements.
Which means digital transformation isn't simply a technology initiative. It's a governance initiative, a quality initiative, a compliance initiative, and it's a risk management initiative.
Technology is only one piece of the equation.
That's something organizations sometimes underestimate. They become focused on what the technology can do, but spend less time thinking about what regulators will expect them to demonstrate.
And regulators aren't evaluating these systems based on how innovative they are. They're evaluating whether they're controlled, whether they're reliable, whether they're validated, whether data remains accurate and traceable, and whether organizations can demonstrate ongoing oversight.
Validation became a major discussion point during this project, and understandably so, because whenever advanced digital technologies enter GMP operations, validation expectations follow.
Absolutely. Organizations need confidence that systems operate as intended, but they also need evidence that those systems operate as intended. That's where validation becomes essential.
What I find interesting is that many organizations still think of validation as a one-time activity. Complete the project, execute testing, approve documentation, move on.
That's one of the biggest misconceptions. Validation is a life cycle activity, especially when we're discussing connected systems, advanced analytics platforms, digital models, and evolving software environments. These systems don't remain frozen in time. They're updated, enhanced, integrated with additional technologies, and they're continuously evolving.
Which means governance can't stop after implementation.
Exactly. Organizations need processes for change management, periodic review, model maintenance, performance monitoring, cybersecurity oversight, and data integrity controls. All of those activities become part of maintaining a validated state over time.
And that's ultimately where Emma's support became particularly valuable for this client. It wasn't simply about implementing digital twin technology. It was about developing an implementation strategy that aligned modernization objectives with quality expectations, compliance requirements, and long-term governance needs.
Because ultimately, successful digital transformation in pharmaceutical manufacturing isn't defined by how much technology you implement. Like, it's defined by whether you can sustain that technology within a controlled, compliant, and reliable operating environment.
And that's the perfect setup for our next section. Because once the foundation was established, attention shifted toward one of the most critical areas of the entire initiative: data governance, data integrity, cybersecurity, and long-term operational oversight. We've spent quite a bit of time talking about visibility, predictive maintenance, process simulation, validation, and the realities of implementing advanced technologies within a GMP environment. But there's another topic that really sits at the center of all of this: data. Because no matter how sophisticated a digital twin may be, its effectiveness ultimately depends on the quality of the information supporting it.
That's probably one of the most important lessons organizations can take away from digital transformation initiatives. Technology gets most of the attention. Artificial intelligence gets attention. Advanced analytics get attention. Digital twins get attention. But none of those technologies can consistently generate meaningful insights if the underlying data isn't reliable.
And that's exactly what this organization recognized early in the project. They understood that implementing a digital twin wasn't simply about building a virtual model. They needed confidence in the data feeding that model.
Which is why data governance became such a significant focus area. Because when you think about everything a digital twin relies on, it's a substantial amount of information: equipment performance data, sensor readings, environmental monitoring information, maintenance records, automation system outputs, manufacturing process data, operational metrics, and in many cases, data coming from multiple platforms simultaneously.
If any of those inputs become unreliable, the outputs become questionable.
Exactly. There's an old saying that applies perfectly here: garbage in, garbage out. If information is incomplete, delayed, inaccurate, inconsistent, or poorly managed, the digital twin can only work with what it's given. And that's why strong governance practices become absolutely essential.
What does that governance actually look like in practice? Because people hear the term all the time, but it can mean different things depending on the organization.
That's a fair question. In this case, governance involved several areas: data collection standards, traceability requirements, access controls, system integration oversight, lifecycle management processes, data ownership responsibilities, and broader controls surrounding how information moved throughout the manufacturing environment.
So it wasn't simply about managing data, it was about creating confidence in the entire information ecosystem.
Exactly. Because if leadership teams are going to make operational decisions based on digital twin outputs, they need confidence that the information driving those outputs is trustworthy.
And naturally, whenever we're talking about data within pharmaceutical manufacturing, data integrity becomes part of the conversation.
Absolutely, it has to. Regulators continue placing significant emphasis on data integrity across manufacturing, laboratory, and quality operations. And digital transformation initiatives don't change those expectations. If anything, they often increase scrutiny because organizations are introducing additional layers of technology and connectivity.
That's an important point. Sometimes organizations assume that advanced technologies automatically solve data integrity concerns.
Unfortunately, it's not that simple. Technology can certainly support stronger controls, but organizations still need clear governance surrounding user access.
That's really the key. They'll need audit trails, data review processes, change management, system ownership, and ongoing oversight activities.
Because regulators ultimately want to understand how organizations ensure information remains accurate, complete, attributable, and reliable throughout its life cycle.
Exactly.
And those expectations don't disappear simply because data is being processed by advanced technologies. The principles remain the same. Organizations must be able to demonstrate control.
Another topic that became increasingly important throughout the engagement was cybersecurity. And honestly, this isn't surprising. The more connected manufacturing environments become, the more important cybersecurity becomes.
Very true. Think about what's happening across the industry. Manufacturers are connecting equipment, they're integrating operational technology systems, adopting cloud based platforms, expanding automation, introducing advanced analytics, and increasingly, all of those systems are communicating with one another.
Which creates tremendous opportunities but also additional responsibilities.
No question. Every new connection creates potential value, but it can also create potential exposure. That's why cybersecurity has evolved far beyond being viewed solely as an IT concern.
Today, it's an operational concern, a quality concern, a compliance concern, and in many cases, a patient safety concern.
Absolutely. A significant cybersecurity event can impact manufacturing continuities. It can disrupt operations, it can affect product availability, and it can introduce compliance challenges that organizations may not have anticipated.
Which is why the implementation strategy included cybersecurity considerations from the beginning, rather than treating them as an afterthought.
That's something successful organizations are increasingly doing. Cybersecurity isn't something you bolt on later. It needs to be incorporated into governance structures, risk assessments, system architecture decisions, and operational planning from day one.
Another area where the organization began seeing measurable value involved risk-based monitoring. And I think this is where digital twins start demonstrating benefits that extend beyond individual equipment or individual processes.
I agree because now we're talking about broader operational awareness. Organizations gain the ability to monitor trends, identify developing risks, and evaluate operational performance across multiple areas simultaneously.
Instead of looking at isolated events.
Correct. Historically, organizations often focused on individual incidents. A deviation occurred, a piece of equipment failed, a maintenance issue developed, and those events were addressed individually. But digital twins create opportunities to evaluate broader patterns.
Which helps organizations understand not only what's happening, but why it's happening.
That's exactly right. And once you begin understanding relationships between systems, processes, equipment performance, and operational conditions, decision making becomes significantly more informed.
One thing I found particularly interesting was how the organization began using those insights to support more proactive maintenance planning,
That's where many organizations see early value. Maintenance activities become more targeted, resources can be prioritized more effectively, potential disruptions can be identified sooner, and teams spend less time responding to surprises.
which is really what every manufacturing organization wants. Fewer surprises.
Without a doubt, predictability creates stability, and stability supports both operational performance and compliance.
Let's talk about results because we've covered a lot of concepts today. What ultimately changed for the organization?
Several things. First, they achieved significantly improved visibility into manufacturing operations. Leadership teams had access to more connected operational insights rather than isolated data points from individual systems.
Which improved overall decision-making capabilities.
You got it. The organization also improved equipment monitoring and maintenance planning through predictive analytics and trend evaluation.
That helped reduce operational downtime and strengthen manufacturing continuity, which can have a major impact on productivity.
Absolutely. They also strengthened process consistency, improved overall manufacturing efficiency, and because they were able to identify trends earlier, they gained additional opportunities to address risks proactively.
Another important outcome involved governance, because the project wasn't simply focused on operational improvement, it was also focused on long-term sustainability.
That's right. The organization strengthened governance frameworks surrounding data management, validation, system oversight, and digital operations, which ultimately improved readiness for inspections and future digital transformation initiatives.
And that's often overlooked. People tend to focus on the technology itself, but sustainable success usually comes from the governance framework supporting that technology.
I couldn't agree more. Technology can create opportunities. Governance helps organizations maintain those opportunities over time.
Stepping back for a moment, where do you see digital twins heading over the next several years? Because this certainly feels like an area that's continuing to gain momentum.
I think we're still relatively early in the journey. We're seeing increasing adoption of automation, growth in advanced analytics, artificial intelligence becomes more integrated into operations, and we're seeing greater connectivity across manufacturing environments. Digital twins fit naturally within that broader evolution.
So you expect adoption to continue increasing?
I do, but I also think the organizations that achieve the greatest success will be the ones that approach implementation strategically, not simply because the technology exists, but because they've identified specific operational objectives they're trying to achieve.
That's a really important distinction, because we've talked throughout this episode about the importance of solving business problems rather than chasing technology trends.
Exactly. The most successful implementations typically begin with operational challenges. The technology serves as an enabler, not the objective itself.
As we wrap up, if you had to leave listeners with one key takeaway from today's discussion, what would it be?
I'd say this: digital twins are not simply about creating digital versions of physical assets. They're about improving visibility, improving predictability, improving decision making, and ultimately helping organizations create more connected and resilient manufacturing operations.
I think that's a great summary. For me, one of the biggest lessons from this project is that successful digital transformation requires much more than technology. It requires governance, validation, cybersecurity, data integrity, and it requires a clear understanding of the business objectives you're trying to achieve.
Because without those elements, even the most advanced technologies can struggle to deliver lasting value.
Absolutely. Organizations that successfully balance innovation with quality, compliance, governance, and risk management will be in a much stronger position to capitalize on the opportunities these technologies create.
And as manufacturing environments continue evolving, that balance is only going to become more important.
Well said. And that brings us to the end of today's episode of the Deep Dive podcast. If your organization is evaluating digital transformation initiatives, manufacturing modernization programs, predictive maintenance strategies, advanced analytics capabilities, or digital twin implementation within GMP regulated environments, teams like Emma International can help support those efforts while maintaining compliance, scalability, and long term operational excellence.
Thanks for joining us today.
And as always, thanks for listening. We'll see you next time on the Deep Dive Podcast.